aggregate demand and aggregate supply framework to better understand the effects that fiscal policy has on the economy. So let's go over the aggregate demand concept and what it is. Now, we spent quite a bit of time, relatively speaking, focusing on the concept of supply and demand, right? And we all understand what demand is, what supply is. When we were looking at that back in chapter 3 and 4, we were looking at individual markets. So we were looking at the demand for Coca-Cola, or the demand for Chevy Malibus, or the demand for Southwest Airline tickets, or the demand for homes, whatever. Aggregate demand looks at the demand for all the goods and services the economy produces at the same time. Okay? So when we're dealing with aggregate demand, it's an aggregate or total demand. Not looking at demand for individual markets, but everything. So aggregate demand shows us the amount of real output that's purchased at various price levels. This was going to be much like demand, only a little different because we're looking at everything at the same time instead of individual markets, all right? Now, you'll recall that when we were talking about individual markets, we had something that looked like this, right? We had price measured on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal, and then you had this relationship between price and quantity. Well, our analysis here is going to be similar to that, but not the same thing, because you can't use prices, because we're looking at all the goods and services. So you can't graph the demand for houses and the demand for cars and the demand for peanuts and the demand for yo-yos on the same graph, because they're vastly different prices, aren't they? So what we're going to use instead are price levels. Okay? So here we're going to look at the relationship between the price level and the quantity of output. So our graph is going to change a little bit in that we're going to be using the price level up here as determined by either the GDP deflator or the consumer price index. It doesn't matter. And we're going to replace that with GDP. Okay? So we're going to look at all the output as a function of what the price level is. Okay? Very similar. So, when we look at that, we've got the price level again measured here, and GDP here, and what we'll find is that the aggregate demand curve is negatively sloped just like a regular demand curve is. That is, when the price level is high, when prices are high, way up here, say P1, the level of output we purchase is relatively low, isn't it? As the prices come down, we do what? Buy more stuff. And as the price levels fall still further, we buy even more stuff. Okay? So we can look at the total demand for all goods and services similar as the demand for an individual good. As the price level goes up, we respond by buying less. As the price level comes down, we respond by buying more. The reason for that are a little different, however. There are 3 specific reasons to help explain that I want to discuss. And I believe I have them listed here. Okay, so there's an inverse relationship or a negative relationship between the price level and the quantity of goods and services that you and I will purchase. The 3 reasons for that are, in no particular order, the wealth effect, the interest rate effect, and the international trade or foreign purchases effect. Okay? The wealth effect, the interest rate effect, and the foreign purchases effect or international trade effect. I can't remember which one your book uses. One of those 2. Okay? Those 3 effects explain why it is that as the price level goes up, you and I respond by buying less stuff. And as the price level goes down, we respond by buying more goods and services. So what I want to do is go through each of those briefly. Okay, I've got to explain what's going on. The wealth effect goes something like this. As the price level rises, right, as we experience this inflation, the value of our dollars does what? Goes down. We can't buy as much, right? $1,000 doesn't buy as much when the price level goes up as it did before. So we respond as consumers by trying to reaccumulate the lost value of our wealth. by saving more and spending less. Okay? So you've got $100,000 in assets. But because of an increase in the price level, because of inflation, that $100,000 isn't worth as much as it was before. So most people respond by that by reducing their spending and trying to recoup the loss by saving more. Okay? So that rise in the price level makes us feel less wealthy because our assets don't buy as much as they could before. And we tend to respond to that by saving more and spending less. Okay? That's the wealth effect. The interest rate effect, I'm going to use a graph to illustrate it. Now we said that interest is the price paid for the use of money. So you've got we'll talk more about this in a subsequent discussion. But you've got the demand for money and the supply of money. The money supply and the money demand. All right? Now, that determines the price of it, which is the interest rate. Okay, now, notice that the money supply is fixed at some quantity. And that quantity is determined by the Federal Reserve and its monetary policies. So they decide how much money is out there. So it's fixed at some amount. Regardless of the price of money, the quantity is always the same. That's why it's vertical. Okay? The demand for money is downward sloping. And we'll get into the specifics of that later. But where they intersect, that determines the interest rate. Okay? Whatever that might be. 4, 5, 6%, whatever.
That's the interest rate?
That's the interest rate. Think of interest as the price paid for money, right? So where the supply and demand for money intersect, that's the price, the interest rate. Now, let's say that the Fed decides to increase the money supply. Okay, they announce they're going to increase the money supply. What happens? Interest rate drops, doesn't it? And when interest rates are lower, you and I will go out and borrow more money, right? It's cheaper. Conversely, if the Fed reduces the money supply, it has the opposite effect. Okay, that's how this works. Now, let's take a look at it from a slightly different perspective. Again, we assume the money supply to be fixed. Okay? So the demand for money, whatever it is, that determines the price. Now let's say we experience an increase in the price level, what we call inflation. That means it takes more dollars to buy stuff than it did before, correct? It takes more money to buy an ice cream cone, groceries, all of that. So the demand for money increases. All right? So we need more money. The demand for money increases, and what happens to the interest rate? It goes up. Okay? And when the interest rates go up, that means it costs more money to borrow for a house, for a car, for all those things we borrow money for, right? So we do what? We buy less of those things because it costs more to finance them. So an increase in the price level causes interest rates to go up, and that causes us to reduce the amount of goods and services we buy. Not everything, right? Because you don't borrow money to go to the movies or go to the grocery store. But those things that you and I purchase, part of aggregate demand, that's cars and boats and things that you would borrow money for, they become now relatively more expensive because the interest rate has gone up. Finally, you have the international trade or the foreign purchases effect. And that says that when our price level goes up, not only are goods more expensive for us, they're also more expensive for whom? Foreigners, right? They're going to buy our stuff. If our stuff costs more for us, it also costs more for them. And as a result, they find themselves buying less of our exports. Well, remember that net exports is part of the total demand for our goods and services, isn't it? Right? There are 4 components to aggregate to spending, right? What are they? Consumer, right? That's who? You and I. Businesses, how do we define that? I, right? Government and net exports. Right? C plus I plus G plus net exports. Remember that? Okay. Let's go back and revisit that. C stands for what again? Consumer spending. That's all the spending you and I do on those final goods and services. I is investment. That's the spending businesses do on things that we make. G is government, and XN is net exports. Okay? So, if we think about it, aggregate demand is really C plus I plus G plus net exports, which I've got outlined here. So GDP is really aggregate demand using the expenditures report. Okay, so if we add up the total demand for all the final goods and services, part of it's you and I, right? Part of it's businesses, part of it's government, part of it's the foreign sector. So aggregate demand consists of consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, net export spending. So, if we have a higher price level, that's going to reduce our exports to the rest of the world and now make their goods relatively more attractive and thus increase our imports. So exports go down, imports go up. That causes net exports to decline, doesn't it? And again, since aggregate demand is the sum of those 4, any reduction in them reduces aggregate demand. So if we go back and look at our graph again, if we go from A to B, what's happened? Well, the price level's gone up, and that's caused you and I to want to buy less stuff, right? Businesses to want to buy less stuff. The foreign sector to want to buy less stuff. So as the price level goes up, fewer television sets, sofas, furniture, all those things the economy makes, less of it gets purchased. Okay? So aggregate demand is really C plus I plus G plus net exports. All right? Questions there? Now, since GDP is equal to the sum of those, any change in them will lead to a change in GDP. Right? If consumption plus investment plus government plus net exports equals GDP, and thus aggregate demand, if consumption rises, then aggregate demand must go up by that amount. Right? Or if investment rises, it must go up by that amount. So, anything that causes a change in consumption, remember delta means change, will cause a change in aggregate demand. If we go out and spend more, aggregate demand will increase. If businesses go out and spend more, aggregate demand will increase. If government goes out and spends more, aggregate demand will increase. Okay? So what might cause a change in consumer spending? A change in any or more of these. Right? Change in wealth. What happens if you become wealthy? What if you win the lottery or a relative dies and leaves you $1 million? What are you going to do with that money? Well, spend at least a portion of it, right? So that increase in wealth will lead us to go out and spend more. Now, let me caution you, that's not the same as the wealth effect. That was caused by a change in the price level. Here we're talking about something other than that. Price level hasn't changed. Okay, we're holding that constant. Maybe you have a stock portfolio, and the stock market is going strong, it's a bullish market, and your stock goes up in value 20%. Now I've got this increased value in my 401k or my investment portfolio, so I can afford to go out and spend more because I just made 20% on the stock market. Okay? Or a change in interest rates. As we illustrated in my example, let's say the Fed adopts what we might call or refer to as an easy money policy. They increase the money supply. And that causes interest rates to do what? Go down. And now it's less costly to buy a house or a car, so we're going to go out and buy more of those things than we otherwise would, wouldn't we? And that's going to cause consumption spending to rise, right? Change in taxes. What if the government cuts taxes? What happens to your disposable income? Goes up, doesn't it? Government cuts your taxes, you have more money in your paycheck to go out and spend. So that will lead to an increase in consumer spending. And if consumer confidence or expectations change. Let's say we're no longer worried about losing our job. So now we can afford to go out and spend more of our paycheck than we were before, when we were saving more of it in case something happened. But the confidence in the economy by the consumer is rising, so we're feel more comfortable going out and spending money than we otherwise would. That would lead to an increase in consumer spending, wouldn't it? So any of these, an increase in wealth, reduction in interest rates, cut in taxes, consumer confidence, or vice versa, will cause a change in consumer spending. Okay? Questions? Okay. Businesses, too, are influenced. Let's talk about what might cause a change in investment spending. Interest rates, they affect us, but they also affect businesses, too. Businesses have to borrow money to build a new factory, order new equipment, and if interest rates go down, it's less costly to do that. If interest rates are 5%, am I going to build a new factory if they tell me I'll get a 4% return on it? No, I'm not going to borrow a 5 to get 4 back, right? But if interest rates drop to 3%, now that 4% return sounds attractive. Okay? Taxes. They affect us, they affect businesses as well. The government lowers taxes on businesses, lowers the corporate income tax, or provides more subsidies to businesses, they'll go out and invest more. And confidence on their part, just like ours, will affect investment spending. Okay? So anything that influences investment spending not caused by a change in the price level. Again, in these cases, we're holding the price level constant. Right? So prices aren't changing, but something else is changing. Prices aren't changing, but the government's cutting our taxes. Prices aren't changing, but our confidence in the economy is growing. Prices aren't changing, but our wealth is increasing. Okay? Change in government spending. We'll talk about fiscal policy specifically lower on. Okay, so if the government either increases spending on its own or raises or cuts taxes, that's going to affect the amount of revenue the government has and thus affect government spending. And finally, net export spending. Again, this is not that international trade effect that was caused by a change in the price level. Here we're holding the price level constant but saying, what if people's incomes overseas goes up? What if incomes in Mexico, China, or Germany, or wherever goes up? Now they can afford to buy more of our stuff, can't they? And if their incomes rise, we can now be more confident in exporting more of our goods to them. Thus our net exports would go up. Or a change in the exchange rates. What's the exchange rate?
One currency to another.
The price of one currency in terms of another, right? Let's say the dollar is equal to 10 yen. That means 10 yen in Japan will purchase $1 and vice versa. Now let's say the dollar appreciates in value. It goes up relative to the yen. So $1 equals 10 yen. Now the dollar appreciates in value to where $1 will buy 20 yen worth of goods in Japan. Okay? Now what would happen in terms of exports and imports? We would expect our exports to what? Go down, and our imports to rise, wouldn't we? Because now your dollar will buy twice as many goods in Japan as it could before, right? Before, when something cost 10 yen, it took $1 to buy it. Now that something costs 10 yen, how much does it cost to buy it? 50 cents, right? Because now your dollar will buy 20 yen. So now Japanese goods are half as expensive to us as they were before. So we will buy more stuff in Japan. Our imports from Japan will rise. But the flip side of that coin is that before, if you had 10 yen, it bought $1 worth of goods. Now 10 yen will only buy what? 50 cents worth of American goods. So our exports to Japan will go down because now our goods will be twice as expensive to them. So an appreciation of the dollar will cause a decline in net exports because we buy more from them and we sell less to them. Okay? Which is one of the reasons why trade deficits per se aren't really that big of a deal, because if we were truly concerned about it, we could just simply devalue our currency and be done with it. Okay? So, again, if we consider the following. The aggregate demand, or the total demand for all goods and services, is a function of consumer demand plus business demand plus government demand plus net export demand. And if any of these change, aggregate demand has to change, doesn't it? Right? Consumer spending goes up, aggregate demand goes up. If investment spending goes up, aggregate demand goes up. If government spending goes up, aggregate demand goes up. Consumer spending goes down, aggregate demand goes down. Now we show that, we depict a change in aggregate demand as, not surprisingly, what? A shift of the curve. Right? Here again, we're holding the price level constant. Price level was P2 before, now it's still P2, but now we're buying more stuff. Before, when the price level was P2, we were buying this much, now we're buying a lot more. How do we explain that? Well, we can't explain it in terms of a change in prices, because prices didn't change. What changed? Wealth, taxes, confidence, all those things we listed. They're causing that shift. Remember those non-price determinants of demand that we talked about back when we were talking about individual markets? Taste and preferences, income, prices of other goods. We held the price constant, didn't we? That's what we're doing here. We're holding the price level constant and saying, what happens if people become more wealthy? What happens if the value of their retirement portfolio goes way up? They're going to go out and spend more. What happens if the government cuts taxes? They have more money to go out and spend more. Or what happens if their confidence in the economy increases? They're going to go out and spend more. Okay, holding the price level constant. So an increase in aggregate demand is depicted as a rightward shift of the aggregate demand curve. Okay? A decrease in aggregate demand is a leftward shift of the aggregate demand curve. Same rationale. Right? If we go out and our wealth drops, the stock market collapses, and now our portfolio has dropped 25%, well now, even though prices haven't changed, we'll go out and spend less, aren't we? Because we're worried about our portfolio. I just lost 25% of the stock market, I better stay home and try to recoup that loss. Okay? So again, a change in any of these things that I just mentioned, let's go back and revisit this. A change in any of these, or these, will cause a shift of the aggregate demand. Because these are all part of the aggregate demand, aren't they? So if consumer spending goes up, aggregate demand goes up. If investment spending goes up, aggregate demand goes up, and so on. Now, you could theoretically have a situation where consumer spending rises and investment spending falls, offsets it, but it would be a net effect. Okay? So if any of these things change, we would predict that the amount of spending in the economy would change because one or more of these components would change, and that add up to aggregate demand. questions on that then? So what we're doing is providing the framework, the basis for studying how fiscal policy works. Okay, because it's ultimately we're trying to affect that spending. So I'm developing the framework. Aggregate supply shows us the relationship between the price level and the quantity of goods and services that the economy is going to produce. Okay? So just as supply showed us the relationship between price and quantity, aggregate supply shows us the relationship between the price level, whatever it is, and the amount of goods and services that the economy will produce. So at a certain price level, how many cars, how many television sets, how many hamburgers, how many vacations, how many haircuts are we going to make available? Now, there are two time periods when we talk about aggregate supply worth noting. There's the short-run aggregate supply curve and the long-run aggregate supply curve. Our focus is going to be on the short run. I'm simply going to mention the long run and simply differentiate it. Because in the long run, we're all dead anyway, right? The short-run aggregate supply curve is upward sloping. Okay, so it looks just like the supply curves that we were drawing back in Chapter 4 when we were looking at individual markets. As the price level goes up, producers respond by making more things in the economy. More computers get made, more cars get made, more everything gets made. Okay? Now, this is what we would call sticky prices. Right? It's explained in terms of what we might refer to as sticky prices. Here's what we mean by that. Oftentimes, in the production of things, there are contracts that are made that last a relatively long time period, months or even years. There are contractual agreements that exist, okay? For instance, let's say that a labor union negotiates with the airlines or the auto work producers or whatever. They said, we're going to get paid this amount for the next 2 years. Okay? So their wages are fixed, aren't they? Fixed amount for this amount. Time. That means if the price level goes up, the auto manufacturers, the airlines, can charge more for their product, but they don't have to pay their workers more because they already have a contract in place. Right? So they get more money without the higher costs that go along with it. Or, let's say I negotiate, so I buy my energy. Airlines do this all the time. They buy oil at a certain price, fuel, okay, at a fixed price for the next 90 days. So even if the oil prices go up, they don't have to pay that higher oil fee. Their price is fixed. So if price level goes up and they can charge more for an airline ticket, but their prices, their costs of sending you from point A to point B remain the same, they can make more money, can't they? They don't have to pay more for the oil price, higher energy costs, but they can still, because of inflation, charge you more for the ticket. So they're going to respond to that by producing even more, because the price